My parents said, "We wish you were never born at my graduation party." So I did what truly shocked them. Stay with me till the end of my story, and if it touches your heart, don't forget to support our channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing with people who matter to you. I was 18 and graduation day was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life. I had worked so hard to reach that stage, long nights studying, balancing part-time jobs, and trying to prove that I was worth something. My parents, Luke and Josephine, had agreed to host the graduation party at our house. For once, I thought maybe they would finally see me, finally be proud of me. The house was filled with people that evening, neighbors, relatives, even some of my classmates. Everyone was laughing, chatting, and enjoying the food. I wore my cap and gown proudly, smiling at the congratulations people gave me. Deep inside, I hoped my parents would say they were proud too. That's all I ever wanted, just a little recognition, a kind word. But when the moment came, it turned into a nightmare. Someone raised a glass to me, praising my grades and my future. All eyes turned toward my parents, waiting for them to speak. Instead of joy or pride, Luke scoffed and Josephine rolled her eyes. Then, in front of everyone, they said the words that still burn in my heart. "We wish you were never born." The room fell silent. I froze, my smile fading as laughter died in people's throats. I could hear the awkward shuffling of feet, the whispers spreading across the room. My chest tightened like I couldn't breathe. My face burned red, but it wasn't from happiness. It was humiliation. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. But I just stood there, staring at them. My father smirked, and my mother looked almost satisfied, as if she wanted everyone to know how little I meant to them. My younger brother Ethan chuckled under his breath, like it was some kind of joke. I excused myself and walked away from the party, my legs shaking. Upstairs in my room, I sat on the bed, hearing faint voices and music continue downstairs as if nothing had happened. My hands trembled and tears rolled down my cheeks, but I wiped them away quickly. Crying wasn't going to fix anything. At that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized no matter how much I tried, I would never get their approval. They didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a mistake. And if that was how they wanted to see me, then I would give them a reason to regret every cruel word they had ever spoken. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror, my cap and gown still on, and I made a silent promise. I promised I would never beg them for love again. I promised I would rise so high that they would choke on their own words. And most of all, I promised that one day, I would get back at them in a way they would never forget. When I think back to my childhood, it feels less like a home and more like a battlefield where I was always on the losing side. My parents, Luke and Josephine, never hid their feelings about who their favorite child was. It was always Ethan, my younger brother. From the moment he was born, he became the shining star in their eyes, the boy who could do no wrong. And me? I was just the shadow they never wanted. If a dish broke in the kitchen, it was automatically my fault, even if I wasn't near it. If my mother was in a bad mood, she would snap at me as though my very existence was the reason she was unhappy. When my father came home tired from work, I was the one he called useless for not anticipating what he needed. Ethan could sit on the couch all day playing video games, and they would still smile at him like he was the center of the world. The comparisons were endless. "Why can't you be more like Ethan?" Josephine would say, her voice sharp as a knife. "Look at him. He's so smart, so handsome, so polite." Never mind that Ethan barely tried in school, while I spent nights buried in homework. Never mind that I cooked dinner when my parents came home late or cleaned the house while Ethan messed it up again. Nothing I did was ever enough. I remember standing in the store aisle, staring at notebooks and pencils before the school year started. Ethan had brand new supplies every time, backpacks with cool designs, shiny binders, pens in every color. Me? I was told to make do with last year's stuff. I started working small jobs when I was only 14, babysitting for neighbors, cleaning houses, even helping at the local library, just so I could buy my own clothes and supplies. It hurt to see other kids get excited about shopping with their parents while I counted coins to afford a used textbook. The worst part wasn't the lack of money, it was the lack of love. I could have survived on hand-me-downs forever if I had even once heard them say they were proud of me. But that moment never came. Instead, they saved their pride for Ethan. Every small thing he did was celebrated like a miracle. Ethan scored a B. Isn't he brilliant? Meanwhile, I could bring home straight A's, and my father would grunt, "Don't get cocky." Still, I kept pushing myself. I studied harder, I worked harder, and slowly I began to shine at school in ways they couldn't ignore. Teachers praised me, classmates admired me, and little by little, I built my own confidence. I graduated top of my class, something I thought would finally make Luke and Josephine look at me different. I believed, foolishly, that maybe all those sleepless nights and sacrifices would finally earn me a place in their hearts. But I was wrong. That hope I carried through my childhood was crushed on graduation night, when instead of recognition, I was met with betrayal. It was then I realized the truth. No matter how hard I tried, they would never see me as anything but a mistake. After the party ended, I stayed in my room long after the guests had left. I could still hear faint murmurs from the street, the way neighbors whispered about what had happened. The words my parents spoke, "We wish you were never born," spread through town faster than the sound of my own heartbeat that night. Every time I imagined people repeating it, shaking their heads in pity or gossip, I wanted to shrink into nothing. For the next few days, I avoided everyone. I didn't go outside unless I had to. Even stepping onto the porch felt unbearable, knowing the neighbors might look at me with those eyes, half sympathy, half curiosity. I hated that kind of attention. I hated that my parents had made me into a spectacle. Inside the house, things were worse. My brother Ethan strutted around like he owned the place, smirking every time he passed my door. One afternoon, he barged into my room without knocking, holding his new phone that my parents had just gifted. "Guess what?" he said, grinning. "Mom and Dad are going to pay for my college. Every penny. They're even planning to help me get a car." He paused for effect, his grin widening. "But you're on your own." The words stung, not because they were new, but because of the way he said them, like he enjoyed watching me hurt. I didn't reply. I just stared at my notebook on the desk, gripping my pen so tightly that the tip nearly snapped. Ethan laughed as he left, his footsteps echoing in the hallway, leaving me sitting there with a mixture of anger and determination swirling in my chest. The only person who dared to reach out to me was Mrs. Carter, a kind family friend who had known me since I was a child. A few days after the party, she came by with a small basket of cookies. She waited until my parents were busy in the kitchen before slipping into my room. Sitting on the edge of my bed, she took my hand in hers and looked at me with eyes that carried warmth I rarely felt at home. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you don't deserve what they did to you. You've always been bright, hardworking, and kind. Don't let their cruelty make you believe otherwise. You deserve better." For the first time in days, I felt my throat tighten not from humiliation, but from gratitude. Someone saw me, someone believed in me. I held on to her words like a lifeline. That night, lying awake in the dark, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I had no family support, and I never would. Luke, Josephine, and Ethan had chosen their golden child, and I was nothing more than an afterthought. If I wanted a future, I would have to carve it out myself. But another truth simmered beneath that thought: revenge. Not reckless or messy, but patient, deliberate. I wouldn't act out of impulse. I would wait, build myself up, and one day, they would see me in a way they could never forget. The envelope came on a warm afternoon, its edges sharp against my trembling fingers. I tore it open in my room, holding my breath as I scanned the words. I had done it. I'd been offered a scholarship. My heart leapt, but then quickly sank when I saw the details. It was generous, yes, but it only covered part of the tuition. I would still need help to make up the rest. Still, it felt like a door had cracked open, and I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally stand beside me. That evening, I carried the letter downstairs and found Luke and Josephine sitting in the living room. I held the paper out to them, forcing myself to smile even though my hands shook. "I got a scholarship," I said. "It doesn't cover everything, but if you could help me with the rest, I can go to college. It's my chance." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then my father let out a laugh, sharp and cruel. My mother smirked as if I'd just told the most ridiculous joke. "Help you?" Luke scoffed. "We wouldn't waste a cent on you." Josephine leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're not worth the investment, Alice. Why throw money at someone who will only fail?" Their words cut deeper than any knife. I felt the air leave my lungs as I stared at them, realizing it wasn't just neglect anymore. It was sabotage. They didn't just dislike me. They wanted me to stay small, to never rise, to vanish from their lives as if I had never existed. The very next day, they gathered the family in the kitchen and proudly announced that Ethan would be attending a prestigious private college. They bragged about how they were paying for everything: his tuition, his books, even a brand new car to get him around campus. Ethan strutted around, smirking at me as though victory had been handed to him on a silver platter. I stood there quietly, my scholarship letter folded tightly in my hand until it crumpled. My parents' pride for Ethan echoed through the room, but for me, there was only silence, only the familiar sting of being invisible. Later that night, I sat on my bed, staring at the torn edges of the letter. The bitterness in my chest was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just sadness or anger anymore. It was something sharper, something colder. They had made it clear. In their eyes, I was nothing, a burden they wished had never been born. I whispered to myself, my voice steady even though my heart ached. If they want me to disappear, I'll make sure they regret it. They'll see me one day, not the way they expect, but in a way that will burn every cruel word back into their throats. In that moment, my dream of college stopped being only about my future. It became my weapon. Their betrayal had written the first chapter of my revenge. I didn't tell anyone when I started filling out loan applications. Sitting at the library computer, I typed in my information, hands trembling, heart pounding, but with a kind of determination I had never felt before. If my parents refused to help me, then I would find a way without them. Scholarships, loans, extra shifts, whatever it took. I refused to let their cruelty chain me to the life they wanted for me. Within weeks, I was juggling 3 jobs. In the mornings, I poured coffee and served pancakes at a small diner. In the afternoons, I babysat for families in the neighborhood, trying to save every dollar the children's sticky hands pressed into mine. At night, I worked the closing shift at a bookstore, stacking shelves and inhaling the quiet comfort of pages and ink. My body ached, and some nights I collapsed into bed barely able to keep my eyes open. But for the first time, the exhaustion felt like it belonged to me, not to their endless demands or their twisted game. When I finally had enough saved, I found a small apartment on the edge of town. It was nothing grand, just 1 bedroom with thin walls, squeaky floors, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of old paint. But it was mine. I packed my things quietly, not bothering to explain myself to Luke or Josephine. By the time they realized I was gone, I was already unlocking the door to my new life. That first night, I ate dinner cross-legged on the floor because I had no table yet, just a bowl of noodles and a bottle of water. And still, it was one of the happiest meals I had ever eaten. No insults, no comparisons, no cold glares across the table. Just silence, peace, and the soft hum of my own freedom. Slowly, I began to make the apartment mine. I pinned a few photos to the wall, folded my clothes neatly into the single dresser, and bought a cheap second-hand lamp that flickered but still lit up the room. Each small step, no matter how humble, reminded me that I had escaped the prison of my parents' house. Of course, word got back to them. Ethan showed up one afternoon, leaning against his shiny car, smirking as he looked around my tiny place. "This is it," he sneered. "Looks more like a closet than an apartment. Pathetic." Later, my mother called just to echo his words, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think this is independence? It's sad, Alice. Truly sad. Their insults could have broken me once. But now, I let them roll off like rain. Every time they tried to belittle me, it only hardened my resolve. They thought I was weak, struggling, drowning. They had no idea I was quietly laying the foundation for something greater. Instead of collapsing under their mockery, I fueled my quiet plan. Every shift, every dollar saved, every lonely night in my apartment, it was all building toward the day when I would rise higher than they ever imagined and make them regret every cruel word they had spoken. The days blurred into each other as I carried books, rushed to classes, and punched in for my shifts. Community college became the first stepping stone, a place where I learned to balance exhaustion with determination. I would wake up before dawn, study during my breaks at the diner, and type essays late into the night in my tiny apartment. It wasn't glamorous, but every grade I earned felt like a private victory against the voices in my head that sounded too much like Luke and Josephine. I chose business and finance because I wanted more than survival. I wanted freedom. I wanted to understand money, power, and the systems that kept people like my parents comfortable while leaving others behind. Each lecture pulled me further away from the shadow of my family. My professors noticed the way I threw myself into my work. One in particular, Professor Lane, often stayed after class to encourage me. "You've got the kind of grit most people don't," he told me once. His words stuck, fueling me on nights when my eyelids felt too heavy to keep open. After 2 years, I transferred to a university. The change was intimidating at first. The campus was bigger, the students wealthier, their clothes newer, their confidence louder. But I reminded myself that I belonged there, even if no one had paved the way for me. I studied harder than ever, pouring every ounce of energy into lectures, group projects, and network. Slowly, I built relationships with mentors who saw my potential. For the first time, I felt the kind of support I had always craved, even if it didn't come from my own family. During my junior year, I landed an internship at a law firm. On my first day, I stepped into the office wearing a thrift store blazer I had tailored myself. The smell of coffee, the click of keyboards, and the quiet authority of the attorneys filled the space with energy. I worked harder than anyone expected, filing, organizing, researching. When others left early, I stayed, reading case files and absorbing everything I could. Within weeks, the attorneys began to notice. They asked me to assist on projects, trusted me with responsibilities most interns never touched. I didn't just prove myself, I surprised them. All the while, my parents remained clueless. When I called once, testing if they even cared, Josephine's voice was sharp. "You're probably still scraping by, right? Living off ramen noodles and minimum wage job." Ethan laughed in the background, his voice smug as ever. I bit back a smile they couldn't see. Let them believe I was still struggling. Let them think I was barely surviving. The truth was, I was quietly building a future brick by brick, connection by connection, success by success. And the more they underestimated me, the sweeter it felt. They had no idea that the girl they dismissed as worthless was transforming into someone powerful, someone who would one day show them just how wrong they had been. Time has a way of exposing the truth. Years passed, and while I built my life step by step, Ethan unraveled. At first, my parents bragged endlessly about him being at a private college. They showed off pictures of him at campus events, his new car gleaming in every shot. But behind the glossy smiles, Ethan was falling apart. Instead of studying, he spent his nights at bars and parties. His grades slipped, then plummeted, until finally he dropped out altogether. My parents, desperate to keep up appearances, covered for him. They told neighbors he was taking a break or switching majors, but the truth spread faster than their excuses. People in town began whispering about Ethan being a disappointment. The money they had poured into him disappeared. Tuition wasted. The car damaged after reckless nights. Credit cards maxed out under his name, which Luke and Josephine, of course, paid for. They even went so far as to remortgage the house, believing that if they gave him one more chance, he might change. But Ethan didn't change. He only sank deeper, dragging them with him. Meanwhile, I had risen far beyond what they imagined. My internship turned into a full-time career, my savings grew, and I slowly built the kind of stability I used to dream about when I was a teenager staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom. Yet, even with all my progress, I kept my distance. They knew almost nothing about my life. To them, I was still the girl who had barely scraped by. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Carter while grabbing groceries. She looked older now, her hair silver, but her warmth hadn't faded. She asked how I was doing, and when I told her, her eyes filled with pride. Then her tone shifted, softening. "Alice, I think you should know your parents are struggling. They're drowning in debt because of Ethan. I don't say this to make you feel guilty, but they're not the proud family they pretend to be anymore." I nodded, holding back the smile tugging at my lips. For years, I had lived with their voices in my head, telling me I was nothing, worthless, a mistake. And now here they were, stripped of their pride, broken by the very son they worshipped. For the first time, I felt the shift of power in my hands. They needed help. They needed me. And the irony was almost too sweet to bear. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights from my window. The girl who had once begged for their approval no longer existed. I had become someone they couldn't even begin to understand. "This is it," I whispered to myself. "My moment." They had chosen to betray me over and over again. Now the tables had turned, and I would make sure my revenge was not loud or messy, but deliberate, sharp enough to pierce their pride and leave them remembering every word they had ever thrown at me. The message came first as a phone call, then as a carefully written email. My parents had never reached out to me with kindness before, so their sudden change of tone was almost laughable. "We miss you," Josephine wrote, pretending her words weren't dipped in years of venom. "It's been too long. Let's meet and talk as a family." I knew exactly what this meant. They didn't miss me. They missed the idea of what I could do for them now that they were desperate. I agreed to meet, but not because I wanted reconciliation. I wanted them to see me, not the broken girl they had cast aside, but the woman who had built herself from nothing. So, on the day of the meeting, I chose my best suit, sleek, fitted, and professional. I straightened my hair, wore subtle makeup, and walked into the diner with heels that clicked against the floor. Heads turned as I entered, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely in control. They were already there, sitting in a booth by the window. My father looked older, his shoulders slumped under the weight of stress. My mother's face was lined with worry, her eyes darting nervously, as if she was already ashamed of what they were about to ask. They tried to smile when they saw me, but it was thin, forced. "You look different," Josephine said, her voice unsure. "Successful," Luke added quickly, as though the word might flatter me into forgetting everything. I sat down calmly, folding my hands on the table. "So," I said, "what is it you really want?" They didn't waste much time. After a few minutes of hollow small talk, the truth spilled out. They told me about Ethan, how he'd just made mistakes, how he just needed one more chance. Their voices cracked as they explained the debts, the loans, the foreclosure looming over their heads. Then came the request. Money. They wanted me, the daughter they had abandoned, to bail them out of the disaster they had created. I listened without interrupting, letting them expose every ounce of their desperation. When they finally finished, waiting for me to answer, I leaned back in my seat and looked directly. My voice was steady, cold, almost too calm. "Do you remember what you said to me on my graduation night?" I asked. Their eyes flickered, but they said nothing. I didn't let them escape. "You said, 'We wish you were never born.' Word for word. Do you remember now?" Josephine's face paled and Luke's jaw tightened, but still they stayed silent. I stood, smoothing my suit jacket, and looked down at them one last time. Well, you got your wish. To you, I don't exist. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the diner, leaving them stunned in the booth, the weight of their own cruelty crashing back onto their shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't the powerless child they had broken. I was the woman who refused to save them. It didn't take long for word to travel. Small towns have a way of carrying secrets on the wind, and soon everyone knew what had become of Luke and Josephine. The family who once held their heads high, who loved to brag about their perfect son and ignore their daughter, were now drowning in debt. Their house, once a symbol of pride, was under foreclosure. Their smiles had vanished, replaced with tight expressions as they tried to hide their downfall. But in a town where everyone remembers everything, there was no hiding. At the same time, whispers about me began to spread too. People noticed the way I carried myself when I walked through town, dressed sharp, confident, and no longer timid. They noticed I wasn't living in that small apartment anymore, but had bought a house of my own. My name was no longer attached to pity. It was attached to respect. Ethan eventually moved back into my parents' collapsing home. Without a degree, without a job, he had nowhere else to go. The golden child had lost his shine, and now he sat in the ashes of the life my parents had built for him. Bitter and restless, he spent his days complaining, blaming everyone but himself for his failure. For the first time, Luke and Josephine couldn't protect him from the consequences. Their money was gone, their reputation ruined, and they were left with nothing but regret. Meanwhile, my life began to bloom. I signed the papers for my first home, a modest but beautiful place with walls I painted in colors that made me happy, not colors chosen by someone else. I filled it with warmth, laughter, and the company of friends who had become my chosen family. These people celebrated me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. Dinners at my table were filled with joy instead of insults. Every corner of that house reminded me of the life I had built with my own strength. I never bragged. I never showed up at their door or flaunted my success in their faces. I didn't need to. My silence spoke louder than any words could. Every time they passed me in town, they saw it for themselves. The woman they had dismissed was thriving while they crumbled. Inside, I carried a quiet sense of victory. Not the kind that came with shouting or revenge plots that left a trail of destruction. My revenge was gentler, yet far more powerful. It was the way I stood tall, the way I smiled freely, the way I lived without needing them. They had told me I was nothing. They had wished I'd never been born. But now, as their world collapsed around them, my very existence was the reminder of how wrong they had been. My silence was my weapon, and it was sharper than anything I could have ever said aloud. The knock at the door came on a rainy afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there stood Josephine. Her umbrella dangled uselessly at her side, her clothes damp, her face pale and worn. She looked nothing like the woman who once sneered at me, who once spat words sharp enough to cut through bone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Alice, please. I need to talk to you." I stepped aside, not out of affection but out of curiosity. She walked into my home, the home I bought with no help from her, and glanced around. Her eyes lingered on the framed photos of me with my friends, my chosen family. The laughter and warmth in those pictures seemed to sting her more than any insult ever could. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice cracking, "for everything. I was wrong. I was cruel. I was jealous." That word caught me off guard. Jealous? She swallowed hard, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You were always stronger than me, Alice. Even as a child. I saw it, and instead of nurturing it, I hated you. Ethan was easy. He clung to me, needed me. But you survived without us. And I couldn't stand it. For years, I had dreamed of hearing those words, an apology, an admission, some recognition of the pain she'd caused. But standing there, watching her break down in front of me, I realized something. It didn't heal me. It didn't erase the years of neglect, the scars of being unwanted. I let her speak until her voice trembled into silence. Then I answered, calm and steady. "Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You burned that bridge yourself, Josephine. You wanted me gone. You told me I didn't exist to you. Now, I'm finally living like I don't." Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't move to comfort her. That was no longer my role. I walked to the door, held it open, and waited. Slowly, she rose. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of her choices. She stepped outside without another word, her figure fading into the rain. I closed the door gently behind her. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the heaviness of guilt or anger or longing. I felt free. I turned back to my living room, to the warmth of my home, to the life I had built on my own terms. My chest filled with a quiet joy that no one, not even my parents, could ever take away. And as I walked back inside, a smile spread across my face. Because in the end, I had given them the only thing that truly shocked them. A life where I thrived without them. Do you believe Alice made the right choice by closing the door on her parents for good? Or should she have given them another chance to make things right? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy emotional revenge stories like this one, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you'll always catch the next story when it drops.